And let me say to all those individuals and to those who are watching the recording, welcome to another one of our security seminars hosted by CERIAS at Purdue. This week, we are fortunate to have the always entertaining Helen Patton, who's with us. She's currently with Cisco, but before that had a storied career at JP Morgan and at the Ohio University, where she was the CISO and actually won a North American award for her work there. As you hear her talk, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and she'll either answer them as she's talking, or at the end, we'll go through some of them and answer questions. And you may notice as she's talking, she has what you may perceive to be a little bit of an accent. Yes, that's an Ohio accent. Right, yeah. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Helen, and she'll tell us about navigating the cybersecurity profession. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me so much. I am going to go ahead and share my screen, so bear with me while I futz around with that for a second. Yeah, so who am I? Why am I here? What does all this mean? So yes, Helen Patton, I was at JP Morgan for about 10 years. I was at the Ohio State University. Don't at me about our football team right now. For about 8 years, and most currently I'm at Cisco. And my own career path through cybersecurity has been one of accidents and misadventure, and not particularly much intentional. But I've been in the industry, not as long as SPAF, but I've been in the industry for a couple of decades, plus or minus a few years. And particularly when I was at Ohio State, a lot of people would call me up and say, hey, Helen, can I have coffee with you? I want to pick your brain about some career thing. And it could have been a student who was thinking about getting into cybersecurity, or it could have been someone who was already in cyber who was thinking about where they wanted to go next, or it could have been someone who was about to take on leadership of a team. And they would come to me with these questions, and really they came to me with the same kinds of questions, to be honest, over that time. How do I get into security? How do I survive? Should I be a single contributor? How do I exist as a minority? How do I do these things? And I realized that I was drinking so much coffee that I was never going to sleep. So what I did was I wrote a book, and this book is going to be coming out in December. You can pre-order it now if you're so inclined. But I took all of these questions and I put them down on paper and wrote and rewrote and thought about rewriting again. And I asked some people to help me think about the answers to the questions. And here we are with this book. So what I wanted to do today was to talk through some of those questions and sort of examine what they mean. And as I go through this, if you have questions, do put them into the Q&A, and I'll try and incorporate them into the talk as I go. Being in security is a rewarding, challenging, well-paying, often, choice to make, but it also comes with some there be dragons downsides as well. And so part of writing this book was not only to help people see the goodness in cybersecurity, but to also watch out for some of the landmines that come along with it as well. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. So let's jump on in. So I'm going to give you the short answers to all those questions. And then if you decide you don't want to listen any further, you can drop off the call. But here's the short answer to all the questions. The first is, you have to know yourself. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you have to have some self-awareness about what you value, what you enjoy doing, not just in a security sense, but sort of in general. Are you an analytic kind of person? Do you need to have all the data before you make a decision? Do you like playing with things, electronic things, robot things, Legos, puzzles? Are you a tinkerer? Do you like breaking things and seeing how they can be put back together. Do you like working in a group? Do you like working by yourself? Are you really happy to be working at home in your jammies right now? Or do you want to be back in an office or in a classroom with a whole bunch of people around you bouncing ideas off you all the time, along with, germs? What is it about yourself that you would bring to the security job if you had one? Or what do you bring to your security job if you have one? So the first thing is you've got to know yourself. And so whether you're talking about how do I get into security, or whether I should be a manager versus a single contributor or whatever, understanding what you value is going to help you make a good choice that's going to bring you energy and bring you joy and not bring you stress and bring you down. So number one, know yourself. Number two, network. And network here refers to people networking. There is a lot going on in cybersecurity. You can't know it all. People who are in college and come to me say, I want to work in security. And I say, well, what does that mean to you? And typically they may have an image of someone sitting at a computer keyboard coding. But for a lot of us who work in security, we never actually code, or we never actually build. We might spend a lot of time talking with our lawyers or with our compliance partners or with other vendors. And what you find as you try and navigate the security career is there's so much going on that you can't stay on top of all of it. And you're going to rely on other people to fill in the gaps in your knowledge and to provide a support network for you. And I'll go into that in a little more detail later. But networking, having a network both of immediate people around you who are in your class or in your workplace, who are your support structure there, is really important. But having a broader network of people, whether that's on social media or through professional groups or whatever, who might also be able to give you advice, but not be so close to what you do on a day-to-day basis that they're influenced by it, can be super useful. So having a network and a plan for networking is also very important if you're going to be successful in security. Thirdly, you've got to stay curious. I think this is maybe an overused trope, but I think it's true. And that is, there is always things that are changing. And if you're the kind of person that wants to do the same thing over and over and over again and be pretty static, this isn't going to be the industry for you. On the other hand, there is so much going on that you have to be intentional about where you get your information, how you consume your information, or you will be drowned in it. So staying curious is really important. And then, of course, being able to communicate well. I don't care what job you're in, you need to be able to communicate well with yourself, with your partners, with your teammates, with your customers, with your clients. And you need to be communicating well and often. Again, things change really quickly. And if they're really going to understand you and where you're coming from, you need to be able to communicate well, whether that's written or verbal, or preferably both. That needs to come across. And all of these things, knowing yourself, having a network, being curious, will help you communicate well. So this is the short version of the book. So if you take nothing else away, take that today. So let's start with some self-awareness. One of the things I do through the book is I reference other books because I'm a huge reader, and there is more information out there that I could possibly stuff into my little book. So one of the things that you'll see as we go through this presentation is other books that I would recommend you take a look at. Starting with Why by Simon Sinek is fabulous. I don't see a lot of books out there in the specifically cybersecurity industry that talk about the why of cybersecurity, but you are going to need it. Whether you're looking for your first job or deciding where you're going to head next, if you've been in the industry for a little while, or even if you're taking on a leadership role, people around you want to know what you value, what your priorities are, how you like to communicate, what your work style is. But why are you in security? When I was the CISO at Ohio State, this was a big question because there were a lot of people around me who didn't understand security, didn't want to understand security, and I had to do a lot of organizational change to be able to get them prepared to even take a suggestion of some security thing I wanted them to do. So there was this question of, well, why, Helen? Well, why do you do security? Why is it important to you? And I think when you look at the security industry, there will be groups of people that sort of fall into similar patterns of why. Some people come out of the military, for example, and they have really a service component to what they do. Some people like geeking out on tech. And so that, you know, they're really in it because intellectually it's stimulating for them. For me, it's all about vanilla ice cream. And what do I mean by that? I'm the kind of person that if I'm going to the office on a regular basis, which isn't happening now, thank goodness, but typically, if I'm going to the office on a regular basis, I would park in the same parking spot every single time. So I didn't have to think too hard about where I'd parked, and I didn't have to remember where I'd parked once I came out at the end of the day. I liked my day to be predictable. I don't actually like surprises that much. And for me, security was a great place to work where I could help an organization be predictable, be reliable, be trustworthy, right? And if I had to sum it up in a word, it was vanilla ice cream. So for me, I knew that what I enjoyed about security was being able to give to somebody else some stability and to give some certainty and to not have bad things happen like the Northeast power outage or 9/11, which were really and Y2K and other things, which were really seminal events in my own security journey. So think about yourself, think about what you like about security. I don't mean what do you like to do in security, but what is the purpose of security for you or information risk management for you? And how would that then apply to the job that you have? So some self-awareness is a great place to start. This book from Simon Sinek is a great book to read if you're not sure how to do it. But simply going away and sitting down and just spending some time in your own head going, why security? What is it about this thing that I like? And if you don't have a good answer for that, or at least an answer that feels right to you, then keep thinking about it before you jump into security. Or if you're already into security, you might want to consider getting out, which is certainly an option as well. So self-awareness is one of the first things. Networking. We talked about this a little bit already. This is a great book, by the way, Tribe of Hackers by Marcus Carey and Jennifer Jin. Lots of advice from lots of people around the globe who've been in cybersecurity for a while, specifically hacking. Hacking is an interesting term in cybersecurity as well. But networking is really super important. We talked about the support aspects of networking, but there is more to having a network of people than just support. Certainly community engagement is useful. One of the things that you'll find is as you start to know more about security, you need to be able to share it with other people for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of people like giving back. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And having a network is a place where you can give back. But having a network gives you a place where you can exchange ideas and hone your understanding of your craft. So community engagement is a big piece of networking. It's certainly necessary, I think, to land a really good security job. Most of the people who are in security roles that they really enjoy will tell you they came to that not because of a jobs board online, but because they knew someone who recommended them for the role, or they'd heard through someone at a networking event that a job had become available that they wouldn't have otherwise heard of. So getting into security certainly relies on networks, but being able to get good at security also relies on networks. And a lot of the professional organizations like ISSA or ISC squared or others, SANS, have training available to you as well. So you can have informal learning through conversations and conferences, but you can also have formal training as well. And it will help you with your career planning. Again, whether you're new to security, wanting to get into security, or you've been here for a while, it's really changing a lot. If you go online and search for the CISO mind maps, CISO mind maps, There are a ton of mind maps out there that sort of try and map out all the different pieces of security. And those maps are growing year over year over year over year, because the industry is changing and what we do in security is changing. Having a network of people around you will let you know what's got legs and what doesn't, what's flash in the pan and what's not, where the job opportunities are that might suit you and your values and your style. They will be able to help you with that. So it will help you with career planning to have a network as well. All right. I'm not seeing any questions pop up in the Q&A yet, so feel free to throw them in there, because I'm curious about what you might be thinking about with all of this stuff right now. Staying curious is about continuously learning. One of the questions that I'm asked often when I sit down with folks and have coffee with them or whatever beverage is, how do you stay on top of all the information? There are certainly great seminars like this one and the whole CERIAS series. There are podcasts that you can be listening to. There are books. You'll see a link here on the presentation to the Cyber Canon, which happens to be housed right now at OSU, but actually started at Palo Alto. And if you go to the Cyber Canon, you're going to find a whole bunch of books, and each one of them has been reviewed by an industry professional. And you can decide by reading the reviews whether that book is something good for you to read or not. I find a lot of my colleagues will curate their information. They're curating their Twitter feeds, they're curating their Reddit threads, because there is so much information out there. But you do need to stay curious about it. It is really difficult to stay effective in security if you keep doing the same thing day after day after day, or you keep thinking the same thing day after day after day. The other thing I would tell you is security doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just about technology. It is also about organizational structures. It's about psychology. It's about policy and law. It's really an interdisciplinary kind of profession. And so you can't only keep an eye on tech, although that's a big deal. You also have to keep an eye on what's happening around you. So things like voting security or misinformation or deep fakes or what Facebook's doing with their facial recognition artificial intelligence database that came out today. Those kinds of things are going to have an influence on cybersecurity where you work and where you learn. So you have to be able to stay curious and stay on top of all of those things. Reading helps, listening helps. However you consume your information, be intentional about doing it. One of the things I do, even when I was a CISO and even in the role that I'm in now, is I will take at least a day a quarter, if not more, and I set it aside. I block my calendar so people can't schedule meetings with me, and I use it as a deep thinking day. Now, one of the benefits of working with Cisco is they do that for everybody. They make that happen. But if you're not in an organization like that, make time for yourself, carve time out. Consider it work time because it does contribute to your work. So if you can, schedule that time during working hours, but take the time to get into your head and be intentional about what you're learning. Start by being really good at your job. How do you get great at the job you're in? But then think about what's adjacent to your job. How do you start learning about that? And then what's within your company or within your vertical, whatever industry you're in, or whatever your professional focus is, whether you're a pen tester or a hacker or a GRC, governance, risk and compliance person. But stay curious about your profession. It will make you better at what you do, and it will help make sense to you what it is you're doing and why, because you're continually going to be asking yourself that question. Why am I here? Why am I doing this security thing? And the more you know about what you do, the easier it will be to answer those questions. Communicate well and often. This book that I've got here, Switch, is an old book actually, but it's a fabulous book, and it talks about how do you do organizational change. It's not a security book, but when you're doing security, a lot of the time you're actually not doing security. You're doing organizational change management. You're getting IT people to change what they do, whether that's an application developer or a network engineer. Or you're asking executives in an organization or the president's cabinet of your institution or wherever you work you're asking them to rethink the way they work, the way they do things. If you're going to do that, you have to be able to communicate really well and really often. I found this book was really helpful about that. So some of what you're communicating, again, goes back to the why. Why do you do security? Why is security important? Why is this thing that you're trying to achieve right at this exact moment important as well? But you're also communicating what your role is, and you've got to share that widely with your community because they need to understand the context in which you're working. So communicating well and often in those spaces is really important in building relationships. And there's one thing about security that people often overlook, and that is the most successful security people build trust. And the only way you build trust is by building relationships. Which goes to the question that I'm just seeing now pop up in the Q&A. And the question is, what are your thoughts about Apple planning to make it easier to catch people exploiting children on their devices, but then changing their mind because people were concerned about privacy? Privacy and security overlap a lot. So when you think, again, when you think about what do you need to stay on top of, if you're in security, you've got to stay on top of privacy issues because they are absolutely related. They're twins. I think my answer to this question is that I appreciate Apple trying to make it easier to get exploited children taken care of as safely as possible. But I am okay that they changed their mind if the community came back out and said the way that Apple's going about it wasn't completely thought through. I think you could get 100 security people in a room and they would all disagree on whether or not the way Apple architected their apps and their phones was the right way to go about it. And I don't think you'd ever get complete consensus about Apple's strategy there. However, the fact that they have a strategy, they're trying to do the right thing, and they're willing to listen to community feedback on what they're doing, I think was really important. And this is the thing about working in security. There is no rule book. There's no generally accepted accounting principles for security or privacy for that matter. We're making it up as we go along. And the things that we're choosing to do are getting shaped by the organizations and societies that we're doing it within. So being able to communicate your position and be able to adjust as necessary is a piece of being able to live and breathe and exist well in the cybersecurity sphere. So thank you very much for that question. So I've thrown out a lot, but there's more. So those were the 4 basic things of no matter where you are in your cybersecurity journey from a career perspective, you're going to need those 4 things. But some of the questions that I get go a little bit further than that. So one of the first questions I get, and this is from people trying to break into security, but also people who are in security. Should I have a degree in cybersecurity, or should I have a certification? And if so, what certification should I get? This is a really common question. There are lots of certifications out there, by the way. Some of them are super technical and focused on a certain kind of technology. So Cisco has certifications for using Cisco equipment, but general networking, cybersecurity principles as well. Some certifications are like the ISSA certifications, or even the ISC squared CISSP, which is probably the most popular certification in the industry, arguably. Those are more generalist kinds of certifications. So you have your pick of what kind of certifications. Here's the thing about certifications, though. They're really quick to do in terms of going through a class or reading the material and taking the exam. The certifications that are worth anything from a career perspective also require a service element, usually anywhere from 2 to 5 years, to be able to show and demonstrate that you've worked in those functional areas. So they're quick to do the background work, but they do take longer to achieve, actually, than some degrees do. So something to think about there. There is a sense that certifications will help you with understanding a concept, but not necessarily mastery of it, although there is some criticism of degrees for the same purpose. Being able to do certifications, though, is a useful way of keeping up with new things. So if you want to learn more about cloud security, for example, going to the Cloud Security Alliance and seeing what kind of information they include in their CSA certification can help you as a roadmap for your own self-paced learning, for example. So certifications can be really useful that way. Degrees, on the other hand, they can be long to do if you're doing a 4-year degree as an undergrad, or maybe a graduate, certainly a PhD degree. There is a complaint in the industry that degrees are more theoretical than practical, and it takes a longer time to change the content of a degree, so it's hard to stay current with current technology. I'm actually going to disagree with that, not just because I worked and I still work at Ohio State as a teacher, but I think it doesn't matter what technology you're learning, it's going to be changing. This is the nature of technology. I think being able to apply theory to the technology is the core learning that you get out of a degree, and that will serve you no matter where you go or what you do. I would also say that degrees are typically not required for entry-level jobs. So if you're looking to get into security as fast as you can, having a degree may not help you as much there as perhaps a certification or even a boot camp. On the other hand, if you're going to want to progress in cybersecurity to a mid or a senior level role, you are probably going to need a 4 or a postgraduate degree. So sort of questions of where you are on your journey now, whether a certification or a degree is immediately useful. Some questions have popped up. Should companies pay ransoms, and isn't it going to encourage more ransomware attacks? There's a lot out there. There was a paper that was written recently from the Ransomware Task Force that talked about some of the issues around ransomware. I'd encourage you to read it. Here's the reality. If you're a business leader and you don't have a good way of recovering from ransomware, and you are faced with either your company going under or people dying, because that's certainly a potential outcome for ransomware, or paying a ransom, you're going to pay the ransom. So will it encourage more ransomware attacks? If you do, absolutely, right? But every decision to pay a ransom or not is usually made in the heat of battle. We can do tabletop exercises ahead of time to decide whether or not, in this scenario, what decisions would we need to make a decision to pay a ransom. But when a company's back is against the wall, they're either going to go under because they need the data that they don't have access to anymore, or there's going to be some physical harm, they are going to pay. They are going to pay. And that's why even the FBI and CISA, they're discouraging payment. They would certainly like you to report to them if you're going to pay, so that they can do what they can to try and track those payments. But people are going to pay, and it's the right business decision in the moment to make if they're going to pay it. And to the second question that's in the Q&A around what cyber threats keep me awake at night, I am less concerned about data theft. There's some caveats on that. I am more concerned about availability risks. So I am concerned about ransomware. I am concerned about any kind of cyber attack that's going to have a physical implication to critical infrastructure. I worry about that quite significantly. I certainly did while I was at Ohio State, but even talking to customers of Cisco right now who are in critical infrastructure industries manufacturing even, it's a big problem. So availability is definitely something that I keep an eye on. So Alex had a question around where should privacy engineers exist in organizations, and do they belong in a security office? And you're right, sometimes privacy folks get lumped in with IT folks, and sometimes in the security office, and sometimes there are competing priorities. So one of the things about security privacy even is that there's not a predefined way of doing it. And what we find is organizations will come to a conclusion about the best place to put something based on their own risk profile, their own risk appetite, and what they want to do. Theoretically, I would tell you that security people, security leaders should be in the C-suite. They should be talking to the board all the time. They should not be reporting to the CIO. They should be as close to the top of the organizational chain as possible. That's my preference. I think that's also true for privacy. I don't think privacy and security are the same things. I think they're adjacent spaces, but they're partners. And so for whatever I say for security, I think there's an equivalency in the privacy space. But the reality of doing security and privacy in an organization is that the answer is you need to be wherever you can be most effective. And in some organizations, that's reporting to the CIO, or if you're in the privacy space, reporting to the CISO or reporting to the head of legal. A lot of it will depend on the ability of individuals in the role to influence the rest of the organization. Influence the organization to change their culture, but also to free up money to do cybersecurity and privacy activities. So thinking about, do you want to be a single contributor or a manager? If you go to be a manager, that influencing skill is really important, right? It's influencing the people who report to you so that you get their best work out of them and that they feel supported and that they're doing good work, but also influencing the rest of the organization. So if you're going to be a manager or any kind of thought leader in the organization, you may need to move away from being a technical SME and be a subject matter expert and be spending a lot more of your time in the psychology spaces of influence and coercion in some places. So thinking the skills to be a manager and the skills to be a technical single contributor are very different. And people in their career path have a tendency to say, at some point, I'm going to become a manager because that's the obvious thing to go up the ladder of a career. And I would suggest to you that you don't do that. If you're a technical person and you like tech, stay a single contributor and work in places that give you authority as a single contributor. If you like working with people and you like being able to have a team depend on you, be able to influence in that way, then be a manager. But they are two completely different things. Let's see. It takes a concerted effort for our HR to agree that a privacy and security position at a uni doesn't at least need a BA. Yes, I know. It's really hard for universities to say you don't need a BA or a BS in order to do a job like this. But we got around it in my old role by saying we want a degree or equivalent experience, and that seemed to give HR enough wiggle room to be able to do something different. But it doesn't always work that way. And so the reality is if you're going to require a bachelor's degree, particularly for entry-level roles, you're just going to have to expect that you're going to have less candidates. And that's a problem for us already as an industry, right? So just think about that. I do want to point out, I would be remiss if I didn't say, security brings with it its own kind of stress. Every job is stressful, and there's positive stress and negative stress. But when I think about negative stress and security, there's a few things that are unique about this industry. One is, at the moment, this will change over time, but at the moment, a lot of people outside the security or the privacy world don't really understand it. And so a lot of the stress comes from misunderstandings. It comes from suspicion. It comes from other people devaluing what it is you're trying to do. That adds security stress, whether you're a single contributor or you're a manager. So that's something to know. The second thing is there is a time factor that goes along with risk. So security people know that in order to prepare for ransomware or whatever the threat of the day is, it's going to take time. It's going to take time to deploy an email security solution or a multi-factor authentication solution or whatever business process changes you need to implement in order to protect against that threat. The people making decisions about funding and about what projects should come through don't think that threat is going to happen today. They might intellectually understand that at some point in the future it could happen, but it's probably not urgent. And they've probably got something more urgent that needs funding. So this time factor, there's going to be a disconnect between security people saying, we've got to start now, and non-security people saying, no, we've got more important things to do right now, don't bother me. So that creates some stress. And related to that, security is often, unless you are in a security company, it's seen as an indirect business function. So like any indirect business function, any support function, it tends to get deprioritized. So handling security stress is, you've got to take those factors into account. So how do you think about doing that? First of all, take care of yourself, all the normal things: diet, exercise, sleep, getting time away where you're not thinking about security or privacy. Take care of yourself first. The second thing is teach the people around you about what security is to help minimize those misunderstandings. Again, we go back to, why do you do security? Why is security important to you? Educate the people around you who are not security people so they understand where you're coming from. It will help minimize some of those things. Network, can you tell? Here are some of those common themes. To get support and good ideas from other people. Doing security in higher ed is different than doing security in financial services or retail or manufacturing or in the United States compared to in Hong Kong. Everything's got its unique flavor. You're going to need a network of people to help you think through what will work in your particular space. And lastly, keep the value of security aligned to the business. Don't just use FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Don't use that to try and talk about security. Be value and positively driven as opposed to negatively and fearfully driven. That will help. As you talk about security those ways, it will help you to minimize your own stress, but it will help other people understand it as well. One of the things we suck at in security is we don't tell stories well enough, usually. I'm not good at making vast generalizations. Typically, we have a tendency to want to lead with data and metrics. And it's been pounded into our heads that we need to lead with data and metrics. And I will tell you, we shouldn't. We should be leading with the business value of what we're doing. We should be leading with stories around how implementing security will help the institution or the business grow. Particularly in higher ed, you never start with the data because you're surrounded by PhDs and all they want to do is criticize your methodology without, they sort of miss the forest for the trees. So start with the story first. Lead with images of what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve, a better technology stack, or you're trying to achieve secure distance learning, or you're trying to achieve a well-managed merger and acquisition if you're into an M&A kind of industry. What is it that the business is trying to do and how can security support that? Be future focused. So we have a tendency in security to say, do you remember that Target breach that happened in 2015? Like if someone tells me about the Target breach again, I'm going to smack them. Or SolarWinds happened at Christmas time. We don't want SolarWinds. It's important to learn from previous lessons, but when you're talking about trying to do security in an organization, you've got to talk about the future. There's got to be an inspiring vision. It could be something as simple as less help desk tickets because somebody has trouble logging into a system, but it's going to be future focused and it's going to be something that the rest of the organization can get on board with. So telling stories is important. If you don't tell stories, if you don't control the narrative, somebody else will. And typically the narrative that non-security people say is security is scary. It's about compliance because you will end up on the front page of Pick the newspaper of choice as a bad thing happening to you. And you don't want that to happen. It's a reputational risk. And the reality is security is just another risk that an organization has, and it can be managed. And the impact of cyber events can be mitigated, and it can be done calmly and professionally and well. If we can get through COVID, we can get through cybersecurity events, but we have to control that narrative, because if we don't tell that story, someone will tell a worse story, and that's just not any good for anybody. Leads to security stress. So the last question that I deal with in the book is, where do you go as a leader when you're done being a security person leading a team? And this is a question I think all of us have at some point in our careers. We're sort of like, well, why are we here? And once we're not here, what do we want people to remember us for? So thinking about, it's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. It's about how you make people feel. It's about whether or not people feel that you are trustworthy and dependable and reliable and earnest. It's a question of, do you want to have an impact just on your company, and that's fine? Or do you want to have an industry impact and grow the profession potentially in the security space? There's lots of ways to think about leaving a legacy. I had a problem when I went from JP Morgan to Ohio State. What I built at JP Morgan sort of blew away in the wind. It changed because of organizational changes, but because I left, a lot of what we were doing was sort of based on the force of my personality. And I was really dissatisfied with that. I worked for 10 years at JP Morgan, and to have that just sort of blow away a little bit in the wind wasn't that bad, but it's how it felt, was not satisfying. So at Ohio State, I wanted to make sure that when I left, I was leaving something behind that people a few years from now even could go back and say, yeah, Helen made a difference. And that was really important to me. And I find in security, we all have a tendency to want something like that. So whether you're starting your career, in the middle of it, or getting to the end of it, think about this question. You know, what do you want people to remember about the work that you've done in your role, in your company, in your industry? And give some thought to that as well. So that's all I have at the moment. Thank you very much for everyone's questions so far. I'm happy to take further questions. If you want to find me, the website there, you can find me there. You can also find me on Twitter at CISO Helen on Twitter, and you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, as well. So I'm going to stop sharing, Spath, and we'll jump into questions. All right, I lost Spath. Is he there?
Yes, I had difficulty getting the right button to come up.
No problem.
So, have we gone through all the Q&A? That there was one about what kind of threats keep you up at night?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, there is certainly still, in the security industry, there's still certainly a concern around data theft. I know I said I don't care about that so much, and I actually don't, but most people in the security space still do care about data theft. And the one caveat I would say is, I do worry about data theft where it's intellectual property that may end up in the wrong hands. And I think there are data elements and data sources that put out of context or put into the wrong hands could be super damaging. So I do worry about that kind of theft. But I'm less worried about social security numbers and dates of birth and mothers' maiden names and all the sort of the things that privacy regulations care about, because frankly, everybody's data is sort of floating out in the dark web somewhere by now anyway. Like, I think the risk of damage from that kind of theft is way less these days. Maybe healthcare records I might put into a slightly different category. But in terms of real damage, I am worried about availability. And I'm also worried about, especially in the research environment, I'm worried about data integrity. I worry that somebody's data that they're doing COVID vaccine research on might be compromised without them knowing about it. And then, you know, they come out with a vaccine based on faulty data. And, you know, again, people are seriously injured. That kind of thing really worries me.
I think the trend of malware gangs, right, ransomware as a service, where they are now combining both ransom of the data and selling out your data to the highest bidder, fits in that category, right? Especially intellectual property.
I think that's right. I mean, private industry that doesn't deal with research and sort of the defense industrial base worry about it from an extortion perspective. And I think that reputational risk is probably worth worrying about if you're a board member or a CEO. But yeah, again, in terms of real damage, yes, it's the sale to the highest bidder that, again, data ending up in the wrong hands that I think could be really problematic.
I don't think enough firms understand that information about, for instance, their overhead rate or how they're going to bid on contracts can be very damaging if it gets into the wrong hands.
That's right.
Because it can impact business in a very bad way.
Yeah. I'm actually encouraged by what's coming out of the federal government at the moment. I think for a long time, we've been critical of the federal government for having a very splintered approach to cybersecurity. It feels like they're starting to get a little more organized and a little more structured. And I think that will help not just the federal government or the people that sell to them, but the whole ecosystem. So there's some glimmers of hope coming out of the feds at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm watching that space very carefully too.
Right. Now we have an interesting question here. I'm not quite sure what's meant by it. It said, is there a fine line between spying and data theft? And by spying, I'm assuming it means espionage. Let's consider it political espionage. Answer it that way.
Yeah. I think it's a Venn diagram. I think you can spy for the purpose of stealing data, and we see that all over the place. But I think you can spy for other purposes as well. So I think there is an overlap between the two, but it's not a one-for-one, is how I think about that.
Yeah, both are illegal, right?
Yeah. Yes, and the challenge with both is, especially right now, you can be doing data theft or espionage from anywhere in the world, and they're typically doing it from places that are beyond the reach of the border-based law systems that we have set up. And so there is going to need to be some international cooperation if we're going to really solve this problem longer term. And there are certain nation states where they're going to protect that kind of activity as a nation state activity, and we're going to have to deal with that in terms of international security and international diplomacy and relations as well.
It's clearly an evolving tool. In my undergraduate cybersecurity class this week, I've been talking about the legal system and the reach of law, and explaining that if they work in security at all, or even if they don't, these kinds of issues are going to have a big impact on their careers.
Yeah, and there's also, the governments of the world are slowly waking up to the fact that they can't apply old style physical controls to digital data. So there's still, as companies just trying to do business in a global economy, there's a lot of regulation around data not being able to leave the borders of the country. If you do a backup in Germany, the backup's got to stay in Germany. If you're in Singapore, it's got to stay in Singapore. And that really gets in the way of having an international footprint, of international resiliency, being able to send data across borders. But this is where the regulations still sit in a lot of cases, and they haven't quite caught up to it yet. So it makes just operating really hard, and it tends to fall to the security and the privacy teams to police that within an organization. So if you're working in security and privacy, you're going to be dealing with these questions of data sovereignty a lot. And it's not about the tech of it. It's really more about the law and compliance of it. So again, more job security for us, right?
Yeah, well, sometimes they have to translate it into security. Like if you're going to go to the cloud, where exactly does the cloud reach?
That's right. Yes. Yes.
Well, I'm filling this in because nobody's asking questions. And I think these are interesting concepts that you can comment on. Oh, there's one. There's a lot of concern about election integrity in our country. What are your thoughts about ensuring that our election machines and election software are secure? And where did we fail if we failed?
Oh.
Is that something you've looked at?
Wow. Yeah, not deeply. So for me, I go back to first security principles. So do you have an audit trail for the things that you're trying to do? In this case, the votes that you're trying to take. I'm actually a big proponent still of paper-based trails to get around some of the digital weirdness. But I think the I'm interested to see where the companies that are doing voting machine security are going with it. I think they've done a lot to improve the security of voting. I think what is interesting, though, is that the politics, again, of who can vote and how can they vote. There's a lot of people that want to be able to vote by phone or vote via the web and not have to show up at a polling place and that kind of thing. And people are sort of couching that in terms of accessibility to polling locations and what that means for minorities and others who may not otherwise be able to get to a polling location. So I think there's going to be a big national dialogue around what is the appropriate medium to vote with, and then how do you secure it? And I think CISA, among others, have done a pretty good job of making sure that the security systems are as secure as they can be. I think we've seen a lot of auditing happening of voting machines, but not seeing a whole bunch of evidence of wide scale weirdness in the voting process, actually.
Yeah, I'll just throw in here, I put a link in the chat to verified voting. I'm on the advisory board, and it's a nonpartisan, neutral organization for securing the vote. Mm-hmm. And as you said, the idea of what's known as a risk limiting audit is key to a lot with elections. You can certainly have a count on the machines, but having a paper trail and then doing a random audit to make sure that it matches the electronic results, yep, is a way of securing that. Mm-hmm. But as you also noted, there are political issues around who should be allowed to vote, how much do we verify who they are, mm-hmm, what obstacles do we put in place, or how convenient do we make it? Mm-hmm. I will note that there are several states that for years have done nothing other than vote by mail. Alaska is one of them. I believe Colorado is one, mm-hmm, and they've not had problems. But it is being exploited as a political issue by some people, mm-hmm, to claim that it's somehow a easily falsified, and it's not. Right. The mechanisms are well understood, which is, I think, a good stand-in for a lot of security, right? That, mm-hmm, we have people vendors who sell solutions for things that aren't really problems.
No, and there's lots.
Cisco's not one of them, but
no, of course not.
Right. And so we need to do a better job there of.
Yeah, I do. You know, the security vendor industry is very hot at the moment. There are a lot of vendors coming into the space from a startup perspective. I do think there is still room for a lot of new vendors who are working on interesting things, but I don't think the industry is really normalized yet. And what we do find, so Cisco did a security outcome study in 2020 that was also the subject of an RSA keynote at last year's RSA conference that Wendy Nather keynoted on. The gist of the security outcome study was we did a double-blind survey where we interviewed, or a company on behalf of Cisco who didn't say it was Cisco, interviewed about 3,000 companies, and then we were trying to work out what practices led to a good security outcome. And the gist was, if they did a good tech refresh, which has really less to do with security and more just to do with IT management, but if they had a good tech refresh and security tools that were integrated with that technology to enable visibility, combined with decent incident response, threat intelligence, and disaster recovery, the outcomes were pretty good, right? And that's basic security blocking and tackling that's been around for forever, right? So yeah, there's still room for the novel and the innovative to come around on the edges, but for 90% of the organizations who are just trying to do something else other than security, but still be secure, those basic, stay up to date with your technology, keep stuff patched, and make sure that your security structure can see what's going on in the environment is pretty straightforward. It's not that hard.
So you don't think we should all run out and get AI-enabled blockchain to solve all our problems?
I'm interested at looking at it, but I haven't seen a use case yet that I think applies in the security space. That's for sure. AI, maybe. Blockchain, not yet. I'm looking at bring your own identity kinds of thing. Like, can we do some kind of immutable identity on the blockchain and bring it with us rather than have to have every vendor, every company, every bank that we work with have some kind of identity management system for customers? I think is an intriguing concept, but I think we're a long way away from it yet.
I'll toss out. We ought to have a conversation sometime. I think immutable anything is dangerous for a number of reasons. Authorized control is more important than immutability.
I agree.
So
yes.
Well, we're not getting any other questions. We've about come down to the bottom of the hour. This has been incredibly entertaining and I hope informative for the audience. You have, those of you who've been listening in, have some pointers to some books, foremost being, of course, Helen's book that's coming out soon, but places to go look and to think about, I think, really good advice about what do you want your future to hold? What is it you want to accomplish? And what is it you want your work environment to be? What I try to tell junior colleagues, I try to tell students is you're not studying for your future. This is your future, right? Don't put off some of those things. That this is life, and how you live it and how you organize it is going to carry over. And I think that came through with your discussion as well. So folks, take it from at least two of us that's important. It's been a delight, Helen, and I hope there's an occasion where you can come visit in person.
I'd love that. That would be fabulous.
So thank you all for attending, and we'll be back here next Wednesday for another one of our security seminars. The abstract and title have already been posted to the website. You're welcome to look at that. And otherwise, everybody have a great remaining afternoon. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye all.